r/Nosleep. Posted by Carl_Sefney. Cell 11. Part 1. Yes, I was arrested. It's been at least 5 years since I served my debt to society and tried to live a normal life. Don't think I'm trying to make excuses and repeat a well-known cliché, but I really had a rough childhood. I lost my father in a work accident, and shortly after, my mother succumbed to alcoholism. If I wanted to eat, I had to learn to beg. Or steal. So, it wasn't hard to get involved in more serious things, dangerous groups, and bad influences. That's the recipe for ending up in jail at 21. Even though I had some run-ins with the police and even spent a night in the local precinct cell, nothing prepared me for what I would face behind bars. I got there and felt weak, like the kid I was, just a child who had barely left diapers and already thought he ruled the block. There were many internal rules there, and you'd be surprised how respectful men who broke the law could be with each other. There were certain ethical norms, and in cases of disrespect, the court came into play. The court was a group formed by Francis, the boss of a faction, and some of his trusted men. They judged some issues and decided punishments, which could range from doing the laundry for the guy you offended for the rest of the week to something heavier. The guards didn't even bother. Actually, it seemed to work well and save them some trouble, and in return, Francis and his buddies received some perks like cigarettes and chocolates. Some of the most notable rules in jail were, never cut in line at the cafeteria. Don't touch others' things without permission, and don't disrespect other inmates' visits. All of this seemed normal and reasonable, but there was one specific rule that bothered me: never look at the painting on the wall of cell 11. I remember hearing some murmurs down the corridor from time to time, but the first time I understood the issue was on a night when old Munford was telling his stories. Old Munford was a card-carrying swindler, used to deceive people with a mask of senility, and as you might expect, prison was a goldmine for him, where his skills of smooth talk and diplomacy fit well, along with, of course, an excellent talent for storytelling to pass time on nights when it was too hot to sleep early. That particular night, the conversation revolved around the unwritten rules of the prison, and that's when Munford mentioned the mysterious rule of cell 11. "Listen up, lads," he said with a tone of seriousness that grabbed everyone's attention. "In cell 11, there's a painting on the wall, and there's a very clear rule about it: never, under any circumstances, look directly at it." The murmurs spread throughout the circle of inmates. It was painted by a guy who passed through here a long time ago for killing his own mother. He was locked up in solitary confinement in cell 11, and during a psychotic episode, he used something that no one really knows what it is to paint the eye. They say that since then, strange things happen to those who defy this rule, from terrible nightmares to disappearances. "All right, old man, enough of scaring the ladies," Francis's voice interrupted, and I swear I could see some inmates jump in fright. Some colleagues nervously laughed, trying to dissipate the heavy atmosphere that had settled. I, on the other hand, couldn't shake those words from my head. The painting in cell 11, the psychotic murderer, the stories of nightmares and disappearances. All of it intrigued me in a way I hadn't expected. That night, lying in my own cell, the thought of the painting haunted me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister loomed over that macabre art. Days passed, and I did my best to avoid any mention of cell 11 even though I thought about it all the time. It was a kind of obsession mixed with fear and apprehension. I longed to know more, but I didn't have the courage to ask. However, fate, or perhaps my own imprudence, decided to play with me. I was playing basketball on one of the sports nights we had in the yard when Bob, a big, tall guy, threw himself against me to prevent a basket I was about to make. I felt my body collide with Bob's, and for a moment, the air seemed to have been sucked out of the room. I found myself awkwardly falling to the ground, the sound of my body hitting the concrete echoing in my mind. As I tried to catch my breath, I saw Bob's face, contorted in a mixture of anger and triumph. He knew he had taken me down. I took a deep breath, ignoring the throbbing pain spreading through me, and struggled to get up. Bob was laughing, a guttural sound that seemed to resonate in my ears. It only fueled my irritation. I wanted to retaliate, but I knew it would only result in bigger problems. So, I swallowed my wounded pride and moved on, trying to focus on the game. But when the game ended and everyone began to disperse, I felt a heavy gaze upon me. It was Bob, staring at me with a disturbing intensity. I frowned, feeling uncomfortable with the way he was watching me. It wasn't like I had never faced intimidating stares before, But there was something different about the way he was looking at me, something that sent shivers down my spine. I tried to ignore him and move on, but his presence hung over me like a shadow. As I walked away from the court, I felt a chill run down my spine. I decided to head back to my cell, hoping to find some peace and quiet there. But, upon arrival, I was met with an unpleasant surprise. The guard responsible for the corridor, Thule, was standing in front of cell 11, with the door open and staring inside, mouth agape. "Hey, Thule?" I asked, approaching at a safe distance. "Guard Thule?" I leaned toward him. Suddenly, his neck jerked, his face slowly began to turn to face me. Now, the moonlight caught his face very well, illuminating the pale skin that reflected like a beacon in that dark corridor. I could see now the tear streaks down his cheek, his eyes staring at me with an irritated red hue, as if he hadn't blinked in a while. Without changing the expression on his face, a scream poured from his throat along with a thick strand of saliva. My legs started to tremble as I watched that surreal scene unfold before me. Part of me wanted to run away as fast as possible, but another part was paralyzed by fear and morbid curiosity. What the hell was happening to him? Thule continued to stare at me with his bloodshot eyes, emitting that shrill scream that echoed through the empty prison corridors. I could feel my heart pounding irregularly in my chest as my mind tried to find a logical explanation for it all. The guard then staggered towards me, with a wobbly step, and placed his hand on my shoulder. I felt the grip tightening. "Thule, please," I said louder, not to him, but to see if it would attract the attention of someone who could help. He put the other hand, even stronger, his face now inches from mine, allowing me to smell an acidic odor emanating from his hoarse voice, now his nails digging into my uniform, and I could hear them entering my skin, tearing. "Stop. Please." My screams attracted another guard, who intervened in the situation before things got even more out of control. It took 2 more colleagues to get him off me, and 3 more to take him away from there, while I remained trembling and trying to process what had just happened. My whole body was dense, muscles contracted by fear and adrenaline. I couldn't get the image of Thule's face out of my mind. My mind automatically returned to the stories Munford had told about cell 11 and the wall. Did that have any connection to what I had just witnessed? Was there really something painted on the wall? I looked at that open door, the number 11 engraved on the door's lead. It seemed to invite me, to mess with me. I could go there, see what was inside the cell, no one would need to know, right? I found myself raising my hand without even realizing it, heading towards the door, ready to open it a little more and see inside the cell, when a voice echoed behind me in the corridor, calling my name. I jumped out of the trance startled, and turned to see the nurse, who was calling me to be taken to the infirmary. "These are pretty nasty injuries," she commented, as she examined the wounds. "It was nothing," I tried to sound tough. The only thing I noticed was the surreal beauty of the woman I hadn't seen before. I saw the name Linda pinned to her badge. "I've been through much worse on the streets, Linda." "Miss Linda," she corrected, tightening the bandage knot with a hint of annoyance at the taunt. I let out a small ouch of discomfort, and I could see a small smile forming on her face. "And Thule?" I continued, trying to change the subject. He, well, seemed strange, very strange tonight. Linda's expression instantly changed upon hearing the guard's name, her eyes darkening slightly, and a shadow of concern crossing her face. "We still don't have much information. It seems to be a psychotic episode, we had to sedate him." She shook her head, pointing to the stretcher behind me, where he now lay peacefully, in contrast to moments before. "A psychotic episode?" I repeated, my voice sounding more like a whisper than I would have liked. Does this happen here often?" Linda hesitated for a moment, as if pondering what to say. "Not so often, but it happens," she finally replied, carefully choosing her words. "The environment in here can be challenging for some. Not everyone can handle the pressure." A guard entered, requesting the girl's services for a sick inmate. She quickly adjusted the fourth in my vein and bid me farewell, saying that I would be under observation that night. That early morning in the infirmary was long and restless. As I lay on the stretcher, watching the shadows dance on the walls in the dim light of lamp, my mind was in turmoil. The image of Thule's contorted face, his red and empty eyes, continued to haunt my thoughts. Whenever I tried to close my eyes, that memory came back, until, irritated, I decided that I would sleep one way or another. I began to ignore the thoughts and try to induce sleep, no matter how shallow. Gradually, I calmed down, clearing that terrible picture from my mind, when I felt something strange. A tingling sensation took over my body, I felt my face start to warm up, and a familiar smell in the air. I could smell that acidic odor coming from Thule's mouth, now, right in my nose. I started to tremble, the palms of my hands sweating as I thought it was a vivid nightmare. Wishful thinking. I opened my eyes only for my heart to race abnormally. There, with his face almost lying on mine, with his eyes glazed and his mouth wide open in a silent scream, was Thule, standing. I could see the empty stretcher and the sheets on the floor. On his arm, the needle now disconnected from the fourth dripped blood all over the floor, in a darker tone than normal. Panic took hold of me as I stared at that surreal scene before my eyes. I wanted to do something, scream for help, but it was as if I were in sleep paralysis. I wanted to get out of there as fast as possible, but my throat seemed closed, as if fear had completely taken over me. Thule remained there, motionless like a statue, with those empty eyes and the mouth open in a silent scream. Blood slowly dripped from his disconnected needle, forming small dark puddles on the infirmary floor. Finally, after an eternity, I managed to gather the strength to move. With a tremendous effort, I reached for the button that called for help and pressed it with all my might. Soon, the guards came running towards me, and I pointed to that flesh statue, trying to explain what had happened. They quickly took control of the situation, removing Thule from the infirmary and calling a medical team to check his condition. I still wake up occasionally trembling and sweating, with the image of the guard staring at me. On some warmer nights, I can even smell the ochre odor escaping from his mouth. I returned to my cell the next day, and Thule never returned to duty. They say he spent the rest of his days in a mental institution. But at that moment, considering all my ignorance, I could only wonder one thing as I stared at the metal bars: what the hell was in Cell 11? Cell 11. Part 2. Hello everyone. First of all, I noticed that in my first account, here, you got a little confused about the timeline of all this. To put an end to this issue once and for all, it's been 5 years since I got out of jail. But even after all this time, I'm still haunted by this whole story, so I decided to come here to tell it. Secondly, I've been trying to get in touch with the prison's management and legal department to find out what I can or cannot share here with you guys. I don't want to get into trouble with the law again, haha. Anyway, I talked to my wife about the post I made and she helped me remember another case related to Cell 11, and while I don't get a definitive answer from the prison's advisory, I believe you guys will be interested in this account. It was shortly after all that shit with Thule. They still thought he would come back, so it was the guard's main topic, always looking for updates on his status. You could feel that heavy, bad air. I was already being haunted by nightmares too, waking up occasionally gasping and sweating with the image of the guard totally bestial over me. I think Francis noticed this change in the atmosphere and wanted to cheer things up a bit by organizing a card tournament. It was a simple game, poker. Everyone there knew how to play and very well. The prizes for first, second, and third place were, respectively, a week of extra food, a pack of cigarettes, and a new deck of cards. It wasn't much, but in that environment, anything beyond the normal was a reason for celebration. I wasn't one of the best players, but I decided to participate anyway, thinking it would be a welcome distraction from the growing tension in the prison. During the tournament, Francis circulated among the tables, watching the players and making sarcastic comments. He was always good at keeping morale high. I guess that's ultimately the role of a leader. As the cards were dealt and the bets started to rise, I could feel the energy in the room increase, everyone focused on the game and putting aside their problems for a moment. It was when it was my turn to bet that things started to get strange. I had a decent hand, but not great. I decided to take a risk and make a bold bet, hoping the other players would back off. When, however, I looked up to bluff, someone made me uncomfortable. You see, it's normal for you to stare at others in the game, trying to identify the lie, the cheating, the face, but that particular pair of eyes was different. It was Bob. His eyes weren't just intimidating, but they seemed to glow with a strange intensity. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I tried to keep my expression neutral, showing no sign of weakness. He just smiled back at me, a smile that didn't reach his eyes, which remained fixed on me, like a predator. I realized that he was imitating, albeit to a lesser extent, Thule's expression. Not in a genuine way, of course, but mockingly, teasing me. What a bastard. The others seemed not to notice, staring at me as I tried to compose myself. I continued the game and finally, the last round came and Bob made his final bet. I looked at my cards and realized I didn't have any chance of winning anymore. I was about to give up when an idea popped into my mind. With a resigned sigh, I pushed all my chips to the center of the table, betting everything on one last desperate move. When I did that, everyone fell silent, focusing all their attention on me. Francis, who had been watching the game from afar, approached our table, curious to see how the hand would unfold. His eyes, normally calculating, showed a flash of interest as he watched the dynamics between me and Bob. Bob didn't hesitate to match my bet, putting all his chips in too. It was now or never. I could hardly contain my breath as I waited for the cards from the last round to be revealed. The deck seemed to vibrate with energy, as if it were aware of the tension building in the room. The cards were dealt, one by one, and each one seemed to echo the pulsation of my heart. I kept my face impassive, while Bob displayed a confident smile, as if he already knew he had won. But then, the last card was turned over and the fate of the game was sealed. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. A perfect sequence, an unbeatable hand. I had won. I stood there, with the same confused look as Bob. It wasn't possible. The cards I saw before in my hand weren't these. Silence hung over the room as everyone processed what had just happened. Francis was the first to break the silence, letting out a loud laugh and applauding in approval. The other inmates joined him, clapping and patting my back in congratulations. I tried to attribute the confusion to the nervousness I had just experienced, the tension and all the rest of the scene, and in the end, well, I had won, hadn't I? I joined the cheering crowd, believing they were celebrating Bob's defeat more than my victory specifically. During that night, after all, I was the celebrity. As the night progressed, the prisoners began to disperse, with the exception of about 5 of them who wanted to celebrate the day's victory with homemade, and somewhat unhealthy, drinks. I was somewhat uncomfortable with all that attention, but it seemed like a good idea. It was me, old Munford, Francis, and 3 more inmates whose names I could barely remember at that moment. Munford was the first to propose a toast in my honor, raising his makeshift mug filled with a very dubious red mixture. Francis was sitting beside me, with a satisfied smile on his face, apparently happy with the distraction the card tournament had provided to the prison. The other inmates also seemed to be having fun, laughing and chatting animatedly as we shared stories and jokes. For a moment, I managed to forget about the nightmares, Thule's meltdown, and all the strange things that had been happening in the prison. We were all there, together. But an idea crossed my mind at that moment: alcohol is great at loosening tongues. Maybe, if Munford drank a little more, I could get more information, some answers. "Thank you, Munford," I said, raising my own mug. "But the victory was for all of us here tonight." He smiled and raised his mug in response, taking a generous sip of his homemade drink. I waited until he sat back down again, seizing the moment to strike up a conversation. "And of course," I continued, "in respect to our colleague Thule, may we meet again soon, in better circumstances." "God bless his soul," Munford said, raising one hand up. "Poor lad, I saw his wife this week here, she seemed devastated." "Poor thing," I murmured. "And did you hear about what happened that night?" "Only the rumors from the guards." He paused for a moment. "To be honest, I wanted to hear from you what really happened." I decided to take a more cautious approach, keeping the darker details to myself, but still trying to extract as much information as possible from Munford. "Well, you know how those rumors are," I said, trying to sound casual. "We can't always trust what we hear. But there was something strange that night, something I can't fully explain." The old man leaned forward, his eyes shining with curiosity. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice a conspiratorial whisper. "You know, that night I was heading back to my cell when I came across Thule. There he was, standing, in front of." I made a dramatic pause and leaned closer to him. "Cell 11. Munford's expression instantly changed upon hearing the cell number. His eyes narrowed, and I could see a glimmer of recognition in them, as if he knew more than he was willing to admit. "Cell 11, huh?" he murmured, his voice almost a whisper. "That damn cell." "Yes." He was staring at the wall, which I suppose had the painting. When I talked to him, he freaked out and came at me. I waited a few seconds as the man processed what I had just said. "Were you here when the prisoner who made the painting came here?" Munford looked at me with a somber expression, as if he were reliving some moment from the past. "Oh, I was here at that time, yes," he replied, his voice heavy with weight. "It was a difficult time for all of us." "What happened to him?" I asked, feeling a chill run down my spine as I awaited Munford's response. The old swindler seemed reluctant to continue, but after a moment of hesitation, he spoke in a grave whisper. "He was a disturbed man, you know. Killed his own mother and all, didn't talk to anyone, and at least I never saw him eating." "But what about the painting?" I pressed, my curiosity now boiling. "What happened to it?" Munford lowered his eyes for a moment, as if gathering courage to continue. The painting. It was eerie, he began slowly. At least that's what those who saw it say. At that time, the guards didn't know what to do. So, they covered it with a layer of paint? I conjectured. Not so simple, Munford replied, his voice now grave. They tried, of course. But the painting always came back. The new paint peeled away exactly on the outline of the dreadful drawing. Shivers ran down my spine as I absorbed Munford's words. So, what happened next? I asked, barely able to contain my anxiety. Munford sighed, looking tired. After that, things started to get strange in here, he continued. Nightmares, meltdowns. And then, the disappearances began. Disappearances? I repeated, feeling a knot in my stomach. Yes, Munford confirmed grimly. People just vanished. And never came back. Unbeknownst to me, everyone was now quiet, looking at us, the tension even greater. And do you know what the painting was? Munford took a long sip of his drink and cleared his throat before speaking. An eye. A big eye, that never blinks, that never sleeps, always watching. Those words, somehow, shook me, sending a shiver straight down my spine. I found myself looking around the room, as if expecting to find that insidious gaze in some dark corner. But of course, there was nothing but the bare walls of the prison and the faint glow of fluorescent lights. Still, the air around me felt heavier, as if it were laden with the sinister energy of that painting. The atmosphere was dead now. We were leaving gradually, exchanging a curt good night. Only Francis stayed, saying he wanted to talk to Munford, and I already had too much information, so I didn't want to be nosy. I bid farewell to my friends and began walking towards my cell, crossing paths with some guards who were chatting. Under normal circumstances, I would have received a scolding, since our curfew had sounded about 10 minutes ago, but not that night. They just tipped their hats and murmured to go to your cell, okay? And I certainly followed my way. Now, an important thing. I was in cell 4, and Munford, in 23. It was about a 5-minute walk, and halfway there, I would have to pass by cell 11. I was tense, remembering what I had heard, and started to slow down as the numbers decreased. I was turning the corner of cell 17 when I saw, standing at the end of the corridor, a large silhouette, someone standing, staring directly at me. I stopped abruptly, my heart racing at the scene. A chill ran down my spine as I tried to discern who or what was standing there, watching me with a disturbing intensity. The dim light of the corridor wasn't enough to reveal many details about the mysterious figure. All I could see was a blurry outline, motionless like a statue, indistinct against the dark background of the corridor. Suddenly, it started walking towards me, and I could see its face illuminated by the photons of the lamp above its head. It was Bob. "What are you doing here, Bob?" I finally managed to articulate, my voice coming out in a hoarse whisper. He stopped a few steps away, his face expressionless, just watching me with those bright eyes. "I was just taking a walk," he replied calmly, his voice as smooth as ever. "And you, what are you doing here so late?" I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized I didn't have a good answer to that question. Why was I there, standing in the hallway at night, staring at Bob as if I had seen a ghost? His voice sounded as if he were trying to sound friendly, but his menacing appearance contrasted with his tone. "I was just going to my cell," I stammered, trying to sound casual. "And you know how it is. It's a long way." Bob didn't say anything for a moment, just continued staring at me with those inscrutable eyes. I felt increasingly uncomfortable under his gaze, as if he could read my thoughts. "Are you sure you're okay?" he finally asked, his voice sounding strangely concerned. Of course, just a little tired. You know." He gently placed his hand on my shoulder. "We're among friends here, aren't we?" "We are?" He laughed. "Of course, buddy. I just wanted to ask you something. You cheated, didn't you?" With my heart pounding in my chest, I swallowed hard, trying to maintain my composure. "Cheat?" I repeated, trying to sound innocent. "I don't know what you're talking about, Bob. I swear I played fair in the tournament." He continued to stare at me, his bright eyes seeming to penetrate my soul. "Oh, but you didn't you?" he said, his voice now taking on a more sinister tone. "You found a way to cheat, a way to win even when your cards weren't good enough. I'm not angry, you know, I don't mind you taking the prize, but I just want to know how you did it." He leaned closer to me. "And for you to admit it. This is all a misunderstanding, Bob, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I swear I played fair. Maybe you're just mistaken, or maybe it just wasn't your lucky night. He tilted his head to the side, his smile slowly fading. Interesting, he murmured, his voice tinged with suspicion. Very interesting. But I think you and I know the truth, don't we? Either way, I'll be keeping an eye on you. With those words, he turned and began walking back down the corridor, disappearing into the darkness. I stood there, my heart still pounding in my chest as I tried to process what had just happened. That was all I needed, another worry for today, I remember murmuring. Unfortunately, that didn't distract me enough, and soon I was feeling nervous again as I watched the numbers decrease on the cell door. 14. 13. 12. The corridor seemed darker than ever when I reached the front of cell 11. I paused for a moment, hesitating to pass by it. A sense of oppression enveloped me, as if something sinister were lurking on the other side of that metal door. I could simply move on, ignoring cell 11 and returning to my cell. But a part of me, curious and perhaps a bit foolish, wanted to know more. Gathering courage, I took a few hesitant steps towards the cell. The dim light of the corridor cast dancing shadows on the walls, creating an even more sinister atmosphere around me. I held my breath and stood there trying to hear something behind the door, any faint noise. For a moment, all I could hear was the muffled sound of my own rapid breathing, when I felt someone pulling me from behind. "What's up, Bob?" I've already said I didn't say. I was interrupted by a pair of hands pressing tightly on my neck like icy claws, cutting off my breath and preventing me from articulating any sound. My body reacted instinctively as I fought for my life, my heart pounding in my chest, and my lungs burning for air. The darkness of the corridor seemed to close in around me, increasing the feeling of despair and claustrophobia. Amidst the desperation, I managed to twist my body. With a quick movement, I turned to face my assailant, ready to confront them, but what I saw before me made me freeze. It was Thule. His hands felt even heavier as our eyes met. The shock of seeing him there, in front of me, after everything that had happened, paralyzed me for a moment. It was as if hell itself had materialized in that cell. My legs trembled more from fear than from lack of oxygen as tears bathed my face. "Thule," an animalistic growl escaped my throat. "You want to see, huh? You think you can look back at him?" His voice was a dry rasp. "He's seen you a long time ago, and he doesn't like being looked back at." My vision began to darken. I thought I would die, and how horrible it would be to die with fear, the expression of terror externalized, petrified in my coffin. I felt my body weighing down, tingling at the edges, my brain only able to scream, "Don't die, damn it." I was almost passing out when breath returned to my lungs. I saw Thule lying on the floor, a large guard on top of him, accompanied by his wife, who now cried and sobbed in despair. I saw myself there, on the floor, trying to catch my breath as the guard helped me up. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. I nodded, still trying to process what had just happened. My mind spun around all the threats, and I could hardly believe that all of this had really happened. "Yes, I'm fine," I finally replied, my voice still trembling. "Thank you for intervening." The guard nodded, helping me to stand up and guiding me away from the cell. Thule's wife was still hysterical next to her husband, while other guards arrived to help calm her down. I slowly backed away from the scene, still shaken by what had just happened. As I moved away from cell 11, a sense of relief began to seep in. My neck still burned, but gradually I began to normalize. I swear to you, to this day, I bear the marks of Thule's fingers under my skin, a reminder of where my curiosity led me. Turns out, Thule was under observation, and he had gone to the prison to speak with the local doctor and pick up his psychiatric file. While his wife was talking to the doctor, he fled and ran straight to the cell. I definitely didn't expect what I encountered when I laid my head on the pillow that night, but Thule's second attack wouldn't be the scariest thing for me that day. When I woke up, what happened left me so numb that I didn't even pay attention to the bruises or the trauma of the previous night. As I got up and removed the pillow to make the bed, I came across something that shouldn't exist, and that until then, I had never even imagined. Underneath my pillow lay a playing card, a club, like the number 11, and with some kind of red ink, a drawing was visible, a small face with Cell 11. Final. Hey folks, hello again. I took a bit longer this time to update, part 1 and part 2 here, but at least I bring good news. This weekend, I got the definitive answer from the prison's legal department, and now I know how much I can tell, and I believe it's enough. For your information, after this incident and my eventual release from prison, I haven't contacted anyone I met behind bars, except of course for my wife, Linda. The point is, even after all these years, this story has troubled me a lot, and since my first post, I've become even more paranoid. Finally, this morning, I went out to get the mail, but as soon as I opened the door, I came face to face with a small untouched white envelope, except for 2 identical characters stamped on its surface, 11. Linda is sleeping, and I don't want to worry her. I'm at the kitchen counter thinking about what to do with this envelope while reliving the final events of all this mess, of what was really inside cell 11. It was morning, and there I was in my cell, in a scene poetically similar to this. I held a playing card, an 11 of clubs. I later searched for such a card online, but found nothing. It was strange, very well made. Before I could reflect more deeply on this, one of the guards passed by our corridor, opening the cell doors for our breakfast. So, slowly, as if in a trance, I got up from bed and put the playing card in my pocket. Somehow, the card seemed to heat up in my pocket. I could feel the heat increasing and increasing, almost burning my skin. It was a strange stupor, almost drunken. I could even swear I smelled ether lingering in the air as I staggered to the cafeteria. I slumped into the seat as I placed the tray on the table. Old Munford looked at me in a friendly manner. "Overdid it yesterday, lad? Your hangover face is priceless." I forced a weak smile in response to Munford's comment, trying to seem normal despite the whirlwind of thoughts racing through my mind. The heat still burned in my pocket, an uncomfortable sensation that seemed to be intensifying with each passing moment. "No, nothing much," I muttered, looking away to my food tray. "Just didn't sleep very well." Munford seemed satisfied with my response and turned his attention back to his own meal. As I stirred the food without really eating, struggling to maintain my composure, I began to think about what to do. My thoughts were interrupted when Francis joined us at the table, his usual smile lighting up his face. He looked at me with a questioning expression. "Hey man, everything okay? You look awful." "I think it was the heat, or maybe something I ate last night." Francis frowned. Unlike the elder, he clearly wasn't convinced by my superficial explanation. "Some of the guys told me they saw Bob talking to you last night. Did he do something?" The question caught me off guard. All this news about the playing card had prevented me from thinking about the strange interaction with Bob since the previous night, but now the memories began to resurface, mixed with the heat sensation coming from my pocket. "Oh, it was nothing," I said quickly, trying to sound casual. "Bob was just being a bit." "Bob?" I felt Francis's gaze linger on my face for a moment. "If he does anything, you know you can talk to us, right? I know he's one of ours, but that doesn't mean I'll go easy on him." I analyzed the options for a moment, reflecting on everything. Well, now it seemed to make sense, a prank by Bob, or an attempt to intimidate me. "There's something, Francis," I said in a low tone, feeling tense about the confession I was about to make. "Last night, after the card tournament, I ran into Bob in the hallway. He was questioning me about the tournament, accusing me of cheating." Francis's face hardened at my words, a displeased expression passing over his features. "Cheating? And you?" "I swear I played fair," I replied quickly, the pressure building inside me. But he was convinced I had some advantage, and, well, things got a bit tense. He walked away, and this morning I found this in my cell. Deciding to omit the encounter with Thule, I got straight to the point, pulling the card out of my pocket and placing it on the table. I could feel it almost incandescent now. Munford looked at the card for a moment, his gaze narrowing as he studied it. The heat emanating from it was almost palpable, a strange aura that seemed to envelop the table. "Is that an 11 of clubs?" he murmured, his voice tinged with surprise and suspicion. I nodded, my own confusion mingling with growing anxiety. "Yes. I don't know, maybe Bob did this to scare me, to show that he has access to my cell, or to try to provoke me, knowing my fear of cell 11. My words were cut off when the guard's voice echoed through the cafeteria, interrupting our conversation as he announced that the meal period was over. Francis looked at me with a serious expression. "We'll talk about this later," he pointed to the card. "Mind if I take it with me?" I nodded. "No problem, feel free." We began our march back to the cells, and I couldn't help but exchange glances with old Munford. He seemed to hesitate on the matter, as if he wanted to say something but was afraid. I made a mental note to speak with him as soon as possible. Our yard time would be in the next 4 hours, and I spent half of that time trying to ponder what had happened. I don't know how long it took, but I fell asleep, sitting, with my back pressed against the wall of my cell. The dream, or rather, nightmare resulting from this was a disturbing experience. I found myself standing, walking through the prison corridors in a way that seemed endless. The walls seemed to close in around me, creating a claustrophobic labyrinth that I couldn't escape. Every door I tried to open was locked, and the sound of footsteps echoed behind me, as if someone were following my every step. Finally, I reached a door that was ajar, a dim light emanating from within. With a knot in my stomach, I pushed it slowly, revealing what seemed to be cell 11. But something was terribly wrong. A man was there, his back to me. Disheveled, uneven hair, a hunched posture, he was crouched down, rummaging through something I couldn't see, seemed to regurgitate. Suddenly, he stopped. He slowly got up and then looked at me. Somehow, I knew that man was that prisoner, the one who had committed those atrocities and painted the eye on the damn cell. I noticed something dripping from his mouth, forming a red puddle in the center. On the wall, what seemed to be an incomplete sketch of the dreaded painting was there. I watched, hypnotized by the horror before me, as the man slowly raised his trembling hand towards his face. Drops of that dark liquid dripped from his fingers, echoing in the oppressive silence of the cell. It was as if the very air was tainted with that impurity. Before I could fully process what was happening, he began to move towards me, his irregular steps echoing like the distant clinking of chains. A visceral panic seized me, preventing me from retreating as he came closer and closer, his distorted figure gaining sharper contours as he advanced through the gloom. I could now smell the terrible scent he had, not just as something rotten, but a pure and concrete smell of death. Who are you? My own voice sounded weak and trembling. The man didn't answer. Instead, he kept advancing, his empty eyes seeming to pierce my soul. My heart was now pounding uncontrollably in my chest, a deafening cacophony that seemed to fill the entire space of the cell. I was about to retreat, to beg for mercy, when a voice whispered in my mind, a distorted echo reverberating like the sigh of a ghost. You. Can you see? The watchful eye. He wants you. He liked looking at you. The sound of my own breath echoed in the silence that followed, a dissonant note of fear and desperation. I wanted to scream, to run, to escape this living nightmare, but I was paralyzed by the terror that enveloped me like a coffin. It was then that I woke up, gasping and covered in sweat, the echo of the whisper still resonating in my mind like a distant echo of a nightmare. For a moment, everything around me seemed distorted and unreal, a fleeting mirage, and then, I startled again. Munford was standing in front of my cell, staring at me with curiosity. "Are you okay, son?" the old man asked in a soft voice, as if trying to calm a frightened animal. I shook my head slowly, trying to gather my thoughts amidst the whirlwind of information. I think so," I murmured, my voice sounding strange and distant even to myself. I had a horrible nightmare. It felt so real. Munford nodded understandingly, his eyes fixed on mine. "Yeah, the situation isn't good. But I came to talk about that letter, earlier in the cafeteria." "Oh yeah, what about it?" "Let's just say I've never seen a card like that, but the energy coming from it, oh yeah, I've seen that before." "What do you mean?" "You know, a few years ago, there was a murder in one of the cells. This was before Francis arrived, we didn't have much organization, lynchings were common, and in an attempt to reduce these incidents, we decided that the main suspect, a newly captured serial killer, would be forcibly transferred to cell 11. It was one of the most terrible incidents I've ever witnessed in here. And do you know how that man was known?" I shook my head negatively. Munford leaned his hands on two bars, bringing his face closer to the center of them. "The card cutter." A wave of shivers ran down my spine. "He used to leave playing cards as a kind of signature on the bodies of his victims. They say he would choose the card based on the person or the method of murder. So, when he was put in cell 11, things got even weirder." "What happened to him?" I asked, a bittersweet and macabre curiosity in my mouth. Munford sighed heavily, looking at a fixed point this time. "A few weeks after being transferred, he was found dead in his cell, hung with sheets. And next to his body." "What was it?" I could barely breathe as I listened. "A playing card. An ace of spades, if I'm not mistaken. And that cell. Well, since then, no one wants to stay there. They say it does something to people, kills them." The shock of Munford's revelation reverberated in my chest, trembling as I thought about what could happen to Guard Tooley from now on, or worse, what could happen to us. "So you think this card is a warning?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper, staring into the old man's green eyes. Munford nodded slowly, responding more to himself than to me. I can't say for sure, but it's a possibility to consider. I swallowed hard. What should we do then? He fell silent for a moment, as if pondering his words carefully. I have no idea. I guess all we can do is keep quiet. We don't want to scare the other inmates. Francis doesn't believe in these things, so I won't waste my time trying to convince him, and I advise you to do the same. Maybe if we just keep pretending that nothing is happening, things will sort themselves out. But remember, whatever this force is, it wants to take you to the cell, wants you to face the eye. Resist those urges, okay? The clock struck 12:30. Time for yard time. I walked with Munford to the yard, the sun burning our heads as we stepped outside, futilely trying to erase the worry from our minds. As I watched the other inmates spreading out across the yard, trying to appear normal, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned to find Bob, his voice low and threatening. "What did you tell Francis?" He whispered. He was behind me, and I couldn't see him. The flesh on my back trembled and twisted, the fluid of fear rising up to my brain. "I don't know what you're talking about, Bob," I replied firmly, trying to sound confident. He paused for a few seconds. "You cheat first, and now, you make up lies about what I did or didn't do. I think there's a misunderstanding." "Shut up." His voice rose sharply. "I'm just here to say that I'm not a kid. I don't go around sending playing card letters or anything like that. I didn't threaten you with that thing, but now I am, and in a very direct way, and if I were you, I'd sleep with one eye open." He was dead serious, and the threat was as clear as day. But what could I do? Confront Bob directly like Francis? That could mean he wasn't trustworthy. My thoughts were interrupted by the guard watching us. "You two, no contact," he shouted. "No problem here, officer," Bob said, pulling me into a hug that felt more like an attempted chokehold. I tried to pull away unsuccessfully, and the officer seemed to simply not care. "Okay, but we'll be watching." He turned away, and Bob shoved me against the yard bars. "Listen here, Bob," I began, my voice firm, confused about where this courage had even come from. "I don't know what you're up to, but I won't stand still while you try to intimidate me. If you have something to say, then say it like a man. Otherwise, leave me alone." I pushed him away with my hand. "You're a fool, you know that?" he muttered. "I'm not looking for trouble, but if you want it, you'll get it. Let's just leave it be, okay? If anything happens to me, I'll make sure some people know." And my assailant's hand closed around my neck, tightening. I squirmed, struggling to breathe as I desperately tried to free myself from his grip. "Going to call Daddy? Look, Francis may have that whole attitude, but he won't do anything to me, or any of the guys," he remarked. I noticed the usual group of big guys who hung around with Francis. They were watching us from afar, seeming to distract the boss. "He's getting out in 2 months, but honestly, I don't think I need to wait that long." I couldn't breathe. Fighting against the grip on my neck, my eyes desperately searched for any help. "Let him go," the guard shouted from afar, starting to make his way down the stairs to reach us. Bob didn't obey. I felt my body losing strength, so I did what I could. I focused my strength into a clenched fist and punched the bastard in the stomach, aiming right at his gut. And judging by his expression, it worked. I saw him lean over, his hands releasing my body and being placed on his belly. I knew if I let it slide, he would come back and continue to harass me, so that had to be a definitive response to the jerk that I wasn't an easy prey. I lunged at him again, this time with a well-aimed kick to his knee, trying to destabilize him. He staggered backwards with a groan of pain, falling to his knees on the yard ground. The other prisoners now realized what had happened, and soon their shouts in a circle were audible. "Go, get him. Don't hold back. Finish this guy off." I lunged at Bob, raising my hand time after time to punch him. He didn't take it lightly, grabbing my right hand as I prepared to hit him. I could feel the pressure applied to the joints, my fingers starting to crack, and I could feel them tense, about to break. In desperation, I threw myself onto him with the only weapon I had left, my teeth. I felt the flesh of his neck between the rows of teeth in my mouth. Without thinking and trying to loosen the grip on my hand, I pressed on the pearly bones harder and harder, feeling them slide against the skin, the metallic taste slowly emerging as the flesh was torn. The scene around me seemed blurry, as if I were watching everything happen from afar, in slow motion. Bob's scream echoed through the yard, mixing with the encouragement shouts from the other inmates. I felt a mix of adrenaline and horror as my teeth sank into his neck flesh, a strange feeling of power and disgust. While still hunched over that bloody man, I felt the blows on my back. It was the guards. Their batons striking time after time as the adrenaline rushed past, and I now began to feel the pain. Without resistance, I let myself be pulled away. Bob wasted no time and moved away, stumbling as he covered the wound. "You scumbag, what kind of animal are you?" As I was being taken away, everything around me seemed blurred, as if I were in a state of stupor. The voices of the other inmates echoed in my ears, mixed with images of the fight that had just occurred. I still felt the blood running through my mouth, dripping lightly onto the ground and forming a trail of red dots marking my path. However, before we left the yard, our warden arrived at the scene, and the guards stopped, my arm uncomfortably twisted behind my body. "What's going on here?" His voice was calm, but there was an unquestionable tone of authority in his words. He bit a detainee, sir," one of the guards explained, firmly holding my arm. The warden looked at me, his eyebrows furrowed in disapproval. "Why did you do that?" My mind was spinning, trying to find a coherent explanation for what had happened. I knew it would be useless to tell about Bob's threat, about the playing card, about the fear he had instilled in me. So, I found the most plausible words I could gather. He provoked me, sir," I murmured, my voice trembling. I couldn't take it anymore. He was intimidating me, threatening me, and I lost control. The warden looked at me for a long moment, as if assessing my words. Finally, he sighed, seeming resigned, approaching me with slow, steady steps. "No, you did that because you're an animal." He gave me 2 pats on the cheek, then wiped the blood running from my mouth. "Take this one to solitary." The prisoners began to shout, a real noisy commotion. I trembled at the thought of being locked up there. No one came back the same from solitary, but at that moment, I really think I'd prefer to go there than what was to come. "But sir," one of the guards said, causing the inmates to fall silent in an attempt to hear something, "the solitary is occupied." The warden frowned, clearly irritated by the interruption. "Then take him to cell 11, he ordered, his voice cold and authoritative. That was the final blow, causing the uproar to become widespread, with even some inmates needing to be subdued with tear gas. I could see as I was pushed, Munford looking at me, a worried and distressed expression on his face. He said something I couldn't understand amidst the noise. With my heart pounding erratically in my chest and my mind clouded with fear and uncertainty, I was led by the guards towards cell 11. Each step felt like it weighed tons, as if I were walking towards the abyss. I could feel the stares of the other inmates watching the scene, some with expressions of shock, others with a mixture of curiosity and indifference. Finally, we arrived, and by this point, I was sweating uncontrollably. They opened the cell and threw me inside. My eyes instinctively closed as I fell to the ground. I didn't want to look at it. I got up, still blinding my vision, slowly groping around until I found the bed. I lay on it and turned to the wall beside it, my face as close as possible. Lying on the hard bed, I could feel my heart beating so loudly that it seemed to echo off the concrete walls around me. Each beat was a pulsating reminder of my situation. I tried to push away the thoughts, but it was like trying to hold back a raging river with bare hands. All the while, I heard stories, heard things about that place, and now I was there, cornered by circumstances beyond my control. Gradually, I noticed the thick layer of sweat forming around me. I could even feel my pores opening, pouring the water from my body in an attempt to cool myself in that stuffy, hot environment. I couldn't help but think about the heat of the card and about Francis. He still had the card. Wasn't that dangerous? I fixated on musings about it. In my feverish frenzy, time seemed to stretch infinitely in that dark cell, minutes dragging on like hours as I struggled to maintain my sanity. Every sound, every shadow was a source of growing anxiety until somehow, I fell into a deep sleep, dreamless this time. I woke up in the middle of the night, with a faint noise coming from behind the heavy steel door. At first, I feared, wondering what it could be, but as soon as I regained my senses, I remembered where I was, and frankly, nothing outside could be worse. I cautiously approached the source of the sound, trying to listen better, when a "Hey, kid, it's me," sounded whispered. "Munford? Munford, I'm glad you're here, knew you wouldn't abandon me." "Ha, I know," he sounded nervous, perhaps hiding from the guards. "Look, I'd help you out, but I can't get it open from this side, try it there." A small plastic rectangle slid through the door gap. A credit card. I remembered I had done this many times before. I grabbed the card and started working, carefully sliding it into the lock. Each movement was made with the precision I gained from years of street experience, trying not to make any noise that could attract the guards' attention. My mind was racing, and the tremor it transmitted to my fingers made motor coordination difficult. Finally, after several minutes of trial and error, I heard a soft click, and the door opened slowly. I could smell the fresh air from the corridor and was already about to smile when, along with the bright light of a flashlight, I saw Bob, now with his neck and shoulder bandaged, along with 3 more of his cronies. Munford was being held by one, who held an improvised knife to his neck. "Sorry, kid, they forced me," the old man lamented. "Not so fast, princess." Bob pushed me inside, onto the floor, and then he entered with one of his cronies, closing the door behind him and illuminating me with the halo of his flashlight. "What's up, Bob? Can't you leave me alone? You wanted to settle things, didn't you? Well." He pointed to his wound. "You just signed your death warrant. But first, I'm going to make sure to pull out all your teeth and make you swallow them." He lifted me by the collar of my shirt and landed a punch with his heavy hand. I felt dizzy, seeing stars, curling up into a fetal position. His laughter was now a terrifying melody to me. "Look at this crybaby. Where did your bravery go?" He kicked my stomach, and I'm sure he found it an ironic poetic justice. His cohort laughed until the beam of his flashlight shifted away from me. "Hey Bob, what's that over there?" he said, simultaneously pointing with his finger in the flashlight. Even though it was on the wall behind me, I knew what it was. I saw Bob straighten up to face it, becoming petrified. He and the other, standing there, mouths agape. I waited for seconds, counting mentally and holding my breath, expecting anything, but nothing. Until suddenly, I began to see small puddles forming under their lower eyelids, dark marks of blood. The red tears started to stream down their faces like large crimson waterfalls. Soon, they began to make a noise. A familiar noise, which made my mind freeze as I felt my toes curling inside my shoes and my mouth trembling uncontrollably. It was the same sound as Tuli's. They were now allowing these moans to escape their throats and resonate in the tight concrete walls. I had to do something. I began slowly to pass by them, trying to edge around. When, however, I was almost reaching the door, I could see their shadows turning slowly in my direction. The tension in the air was palpable, as if it could be cut with a knife. I held myself back from trembling as I tried to maintain composure in front of those men, whose bloodshot eyes were now fixed on me, full of terror and despair. What's happening?" My voice came out in a trembling whisper, barely able to make myself heard. Bob and his cohort remained silent. They began to walk towards me, and in desperation, I opened the cell door and slammed it loudly behind me, not caring about attracting the guards' attention. As I looked around, I actually noticed that this was a concern I didn't need to have. The environment where I was wasn't what I expected, from the prison corridor. It was actually another cell. I stopped for a moment, confused, only to be surprised by a figure in the center of it. A man in a straitjacket looking at me with a petrified smile. "I've been waiting for you," he said. His voice was blood-curdling, sounding like someone scratching a chalkboard with their nails or scraping a fork on a glass plate. I tried to open the door but it was stuck. When I turned around again, he was leaning, his face inches from mine, eyes bloodshot. I almost fell backward. He laughed. It was like the last time. He had his mouth covered by a sticky red mass that dripped, probably serving as material for the painting, which now displayed an almost complete surreal eye. He turned and walked to the painting, and then he regurgitated it again. Since his hands were tied, he used his tongue as a brush, finishing the last line of the drawing. "This," he whispered, "is my masterpiece." I was trembling. I had forgotten Munford's advice, and now I found myself petrified, just like the others, staring at the eye. I don't know how much time passed, but I felt like it was hours, days, years. All in the blink of an eye, or rather, in a stare without a single blink. I tried in vain to regain my composure. Scenes of horror penetrated my mind. Cadavers, bodies marked by playing cards. Criminals, inmates being violently beaten with batons, pepper spray, and all sorts of luxuries the police can serve. I saw gang fights, blood, death, and abuse. I saw people being killed inside the prison. Each scene of violence that each of those who looked had already witnessed. My legs were no more than reeds in the wind now, and I just wanted to run away and scream, cry, and sleep to never wake up again. I tried to scream but the man came to me, placing his foot over my mouth. "Shh. You need to see." He repeated this indefinitely. "Need to see, need to see, need to see, Need to see. With superhuman effort, I managed to free myself from the weight of his foot on my mouth, but I could barely articulate coherent words. My voice came out trembling and weak when I finally managed to speak. "What do you want from me? Why are you doing this?" He simply continued smiling, as if my words were just another piece in his sadistic game. Then, with a quick and fluid movement, he approached me, so close that I could feel his fetid breath and the metallic smell of blood dripping from his mouth. "Your mind is a fascinating playground," he murmured, his voice echoing in the claustrophobic space of the cell. I felt tears running down my cheek, and I knew what color they were. I stood there, in shock, staring at the large painted eye, while my entire being was eaten alive in fear and dread. I don't know how much time passed, maybe the entire age of the universe, eternity, who knows. I woke up on the infirmary bed. Wires connected to my arm while a machine reproduced the beeps of my heart. I looked to the side, seeing the green eyes of Nurse Linda looking at me, concerned. "Are you okay?" "You need to see," I said, not even wanting to. She frowned, evidently confused by my response. Linda seemed hesitant, as if she were trying to decide whether to ask more or simply ignore my strange statement. I could see the concern in her eyes, but also a certain curiosity, as if something inside her was intrigued by what I had to say. "What do you mean by that?" she finally asked, her soft voice echoing in the silence of the infirmary. I sat up slowly on the bed, feeling a wave of dizziness pass over me. My mind was still cloudy, as if I were struggling to emerge from a deep nightmare. I tried to articulate my words as coherently as possible. I saw things," I murmured, my voice still trembling. "Terrible things. In the cell. In there. Something is wrong." Linda watched me with a serious expression, her green eyes analyzing me carefully. She seemed to understand that something serious had happened, but couldn't fully comprehend what I was trying to communicate. "Look. You and the others had a collective hallucination in that cell. The director has already arranged for an investigation, but we suspect carbon monoxide poisoning. We've already talked to him about the lack of windows in that place, but it seems he doesn't listen." I stopped, confused by that information. Was I hallucinating? Well, maybe I would even think that if it weren't for what followed. A man in a dark suit entered. He had a serious and intimidating expression, and he asked Linda to leave. "Listen here, young man, you're lucky to have come back. The others are catatonic. And probably won't come back to themselves. That's why your cooperation is extremely important, and we need to know, what did you see?" I stumbled, recounting as much information as I could remember, from Tuli to Bob. The man listened to me without making any expression. After that, he took a radio that was hanging from his blazer and said some words that I didn't quite understand, something like "sitter," "quitter," and then he took a clipboard, handing it to me. "This is your letter of freedom. Our proposal is as follows: we release you from prison and in exchange, you don't open your mouth about the specific events mentioned here." He pointed to the clauses. That was 5 years ago, and given my freedom, you must imagine that not everything that happened is transcribed here, but the most important parts are. I ended up visiting Munford a few times after that, and I was horrified to discover that Francis, on the eve of his release, hanged himself with a bedsheet. The old man and I stared at each other after this discovery, in a mutual silent understanding. Shortly after, they closed not only the cell, but our entire pavilion, relocating the inmates. I never saw Munford or any of the others again after that. My nightmares persisted, but in recent months they have been much less frequent, and I think I might be slowly healing. I wanted to say that this story ends well, with my rehabilitation. A troublesome prisoner full of stories becoming a family man. And it would be, if it weren't for the last 15 minutes of this morning. I believe you may remember that I received a letter this morning like that cursed number. I left it on the counter in the living room while I came here, to have breakfast and finish reporting this to you. When I finished the last paragraph, I went back to the room, but now, it seems like the whole nightmare is back. I felt the tears, transparent this time, forming in my eyes. In the center of the room right now is Linda, holding the letter, looking at something in it that I can already imagine. She's standing there, wet and red stains on her face. I can hear her whispering, "You need to see. Need to see," and by God, I can see.